Hello and welcome back from your Easter break. I'm delighted that you decided to start the working week with our event, The Future of Online Advertising, Innovative Practices on the Rise, hosted by the Greens Effort Group in the European Parliament. What could be better than to start the summer with innovative practices? My name is Alexandra. I'm the Shadow Rapporteur for the Digital Services Act in the European Parliament, which means that I negotiate the Digital Services Act in Parliament and now in trilogue on behalf of my political group. And I would like to start with a few introductory remarks why the Green Group cares so much about innovative practices in advertising, which might not be an absolutely obvious choice. We have been the group that has been leading the important campaign to stop the use of personal data in advertising. And the reason why we did this were our concerns about democracy and the negative impact surveillance advertising, the current practice in online advertising, has on democracy. Just think about the data profiles created for advertising that allow external actors to use that data to manipulate population groups, as happened. We know today that this has happened systematically in the 2016 US elections. The same data profiles are also used by the platforms to direct specific content to people in order to rouse fear and anger in them. And that works because the content is so well tailored. And that means they can increase engagement, they can increase advertising dollars, but it also means increasing fear and hate and mistrust in societies, radicalizing people, and making it ever more difficult to find compromises, to understand each other, which is the basis of democratic societies. These data profiles can also be used to target disinformation to specific population groups. And we are seeing now in the Russian war against Ukraine how crucial, how instrumental disinformation also in Western society is. Because targeting disinformation to specific groups means it is spread there until it goes viral. And when it comes to the surface of broader society and could be debunked, millions and millions of people already believe in it. And then it is very, very difficult to get rid of a piece of this information, as ridiculous as it might seem. Furthermore, from an economic point of view, former Harvard Professor Shoshana Zuboff has shown in her groundbreaking book, Surveillance Capitalism, that once the surveillance capitalism mechanism is established, all other digital companies need to follow suit. And that means that the whole economic system will be based on surveillance. And this is exactly the contrary from what a free and democratic society needs in the long term. But when we started focusing on the ban of surveillance advertising, most people agreed that from a political point of view and a freedom point of view, we had a really good point. But driven by large Facebook and Google lobbying campaigns, the counter argument then was that surveillance advertising was good for small and medium enterprises, and it funded the internet. This is untrue because there's no evidence, but we were made aware of the fact that the system is so intransparent that many people, including my colleagues as policymakers, have difficulty seeing through the surface and recognizing that surveillance advertising is actually hampering innovation and harming small and medium enterprises. And this is the reason why we, as a forward-looking political group, want today to give visibility to change makers, to innovative entrepreneurs who offer better types of advertising that give small and medium enterprising and consumers a fair deal without surveilling citizens and consumers. And this event couldn't be more timely because the tide is changing. You all know that the EU is working on a groundbreaking legislation for online platforms, the Digital Services Act. And I can say today that I'm confident that we will have a breakthrough on Friday this week in the trilogue between the European Parliament and the European Council. And I'm also very confident that we will achieve a ban for the use of sensitive data for advertising and a ban for the use of the data, personal data of minors for advertising. And this is groundbreaking. At the same time, there is litigation going on. The Belgian Data Protection Authority has already said that the most used consent framework in the internet for data treatment is not compliant with the GDPR. So things are changing. Surveillance advertising is being challenged. There's no acceptance for this business model anymore in democratic society. This is why we invite policymakers to create a level playing field for SMEs, for advertisers, and for advertising service providers. A level playing field that is not based on the control of personal data, but on effectiveness on advertising, on quality, and that is also compatible with freedom and democracy. And this is why I'm very happy today that you will discuss with our distinguished guests, entrepreneurs and innovators who have joined us today to explore the many opportunities offered by context advertising and other types of advertising not based on surveillance. Because we want to spread the message that the internet does not need to be a surveillance machine. It is a great technological tool for citizens, democracies, and businesses alike. And with this, I'm very happy to hand over to today's moderator, Jennifer Baker, who most of you know. She's a freelance journalist. She's a great expert of all things digital, and she knows Brussels very well. Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. You've set it out all so beautifully, and you've really nailed, I think, what we want to talk about today. Of course, it's all going to rotate around this Digital Services Act, and that's why we're having the conversation today. But as you said, we don't want to focus too much on being negative, because there's a lot of pushback, I think, we see in the lobbying that's going on around this. I've not seen anything quite like it since the GDPR lobbying. And there's a sense that some organizations that we're all just killjoys and want to ruin the internet or break the internet. Now, that hasn't happened with GDPR, and we don't think it's going to happen with the DSA either. So what we're going to talk about today is, with, as you say, these great innovators and experts, is alternatives, how you can still make a business from online advertising, but you can do it in a way that respects privacy. So I think it's a nice, refreshing take on it, getting us away from the either or sort of false dichotomy of privacy versus advertising in a way that perhaps has overly defined debates here in Brussels for the last almost decade or so that I've been covering this. With that, I'm going to introduce you to our speakers, because as we've said today, we have some fantastic speakers. We have Julie Walther, the co-founder of Qwarry, which is a French ad tech company that helps brands and publishers reinvent their advertising through contextual advertising. So not the behavioral, but contextual targeting with full privacy approach. And before she launched Qwarry in 2019, she'd already spent 15 years in the industry. So as well as various roles at Yahoo and eBay, some big tech giants there. So knows the whole ecosystem extremely well, Julie. Our second speaker today will be Martin Stoev, of co-founder and CEO of Adhash, which is another advertising technology company, but that looks at the underlying core protocol that powers these technologies, and it looks at advertising in a way that doesn't use cookies and doesn't use identifiers or fingerprinting, thus respecting privacy of the users. But he was previously also the founder of Trader, which was a tech company that brought a class action suit against Google in California. Martin, I'm sure you'll be able to tell us more about that as the conversation goes on. And last but not least, Erik is the co-founder and CEO of the leading contextual advertising company, Kobler, and is going to talk to us, I think, today about the lack of enforcement and how that's hampering innovation and competition in the European market, and talk to us about the current status quo and about what might be done better in the future. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the audience, because I do want to remind you that you can start writing your questions to our three speakers in that comments, and I will try to get to them all, as many as possible, in the next hour and a half or so. So do feel free, if they're saying something in their presentations that you want to know more about, jump in and ask the question, and we'll get to that once we've heard our introductory comments from all of our three speakers. Julie, I'm going to hand the floor over to you to kick us off. I know you have a presentation, so feel free to share your screen.
Yes. Can you, well, hold on, share my screen, hold on. Can you all see my screen? Can you all see my screen?
Well, I can certainly see it, Julie. So I'm trusting the back end
Okay,
gods
great.
that everything is working fine. I can
I
certainly see it.
see it. So thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation today and the opportunity to share my point of view, at least on what is contextual and the benefits it brings to the advertising landscape. But before we start exploring contextual targeting, I'd like to explain first what is behavior targeting. And to do so, I'd like to introduce you to someone. Let's call her Anna. So who is she? So Anna, she's 25 years old. She lives in Paris. She likes pop music. She wants to change her cell phone and is looking to buy her first car by the end of the year. She likes to browse like everyone else on the internet and get information on different topics. So she goes on a website run by publishers. Publishers, what do they want? They want to monetize their audiences, but they don't have the sufficient sales force to sell 100% of their advertising placement. So they will connect with different technology that will help them monetize their unsold inventories. And those technology, they will collect information from Anna to be able to give her an advertising value. And they would share Anna's information with many, many other players. So as a snowball effect, they now all know Anna's gender, age, geographics, latest browser's research, and her direct interest. So while she enjoys free browsing on her favorite website, does Anna want her personal visit data shared with thousands of players? We can all agree that those operating methods are around behavior targeting don't respect Anna's privacy, and that it is not sustainable over time. So the question that remains is how can publishers still monetize their content? Here, I believe that contextual can actually bring the solution. Why? It's very simple. After almost 2 decades of what I've learned from digital advertising, it's that it has been the Far West. Well, all the information of any user can be automatically shared with more than thousands and thousands of players without any user knowing about it or being able to block it. We have seen over the 4 years a real shift in our industry and a new era for privacy improvement in advertising. GDPR was, of course, the first footstep, followed a year later by Safari and by Firefox, who started to block third-party cookies from their browser. And those companies started implementing new standards around privacy for consumers, pushing Chrome to take a stand in regards to data privacy, leading to the disappearance of third-party cookie by the middle of next year. It's a real change of paradox, and for the first time, the giant of the web really don't know how to address it. Like you mentioned, Google and Meta duopoly has been extremely challenged for the past months with GDPR compliance. We all remember that Facebook threatened to remove its activity from Europe a few months ago, but there are also more and more challenges on their performance and their transparency that gets weaker and weaker. Today, brands are paying more and more attention to their corporate social responsibility and know that the gamma are not compatible. We see that the display advertising at a double-digit growth. It's actually growing stronger than search or social. And advertisers and their agencies, they are heavily looking for effective and sustainable alternatives for their brand campaign. In this context, I have seen in France, but also in other markets, contextual targeting getting a lot of traction and a lot of interest, and it has now returned to the center stage. Why? Because it existed before behavior targeting was invented. And it worked back then when we could only target domains. But now, with the evolution of our market, as known in terms of AI, in terms of cloud computing, contextual has now become so elaborate that it can target very precisely each URL of any website. If you look at the example that I provided here, we are now able for any content to tell exactly if it's talking about contemporary art, if it's related to wine, to cosmetic beauty, and so on. So why is it working so well? It's very simple, actually. It's because there's always been a strong correlation between the content and the audiences. It's as simple as that. For brands, it's the best way to connect to their audience. It's non-intrusive, it's relevant, because users are somehow interested in the same topics as the product or services that you are selling. And for the brand, it's also super safe because they can identify which content they want their image to be associated with, something that is not possible to do when it comes to social media, for instance. They can also block the content that are considered non-safe or that could damage their brain. This is something behavior targeting has never been able to do. Why? Because it's only focusing on the user, never on the content or the content text. So for advertiser, what contextual actually does? No matter their size, we have conveyed internally at Qwarry several studies with independent KPI tracking tools and on a certain number of campaigns to measure the campaign effectiveness. What we have been seeing across the board is that the brand perception is always better than when it's done with behavior targeting. People remember more often seeing the ads. The intent for the brand is higher. The ad remembrance and its impact is also way much better, as well as the purchase intent. In a nutshell, contextual works for advertisers. When it comes to publishers, contextual helps them monetize 100% of their inventory, which is, let's keep this in mind, it's not currently the case. Because if there's no consent from the user, then the publisher cannot display a targeted ad. But it can do it with contextual has a direct impact on their ad coverage and increase the monetization. They also get a higher revenue per impression thanks to the augmented value that the contextual is bringing to their inventory. And the thing is, with contextual player like Qwarry, we are buying the impression the behavior targeting technology is not interested in. So it's a direct added revenue for the publishers. And last, it values more their editorial content. It's at least bringing a fair value of any content. You have to keep in mind that in our industry, if there's no info linked to a user, the impression is worthless. No one is going to pay for it, except for the contextual players. Why? Because we just simply don't care who is behind the impression. What truly matters is the content it is on. To conclude, I'd like to say that at Qwarry, one of our core values is be the change you want to see. And I really believe that contextual is the change the advertising industry will see in the upcoming years, as it brings more transparency among advertisers and publishers and also users. Everyone knows where the data is coming from. It's only one information that is shared among the platforms, which is just the URL and the content associated with it. We don't need to have millions of calls on thousands of servers on the planet to retrieve any user. It can be done, and it is as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. As you say, it's bringing it back and moving away from this programmatic advertising, as it's often called, but I tend to prefer to call it problematic advertising. And I think we'll move on. We have some questions already coming in. I see Toon has asked a question, but we'll come to that after we hear from our next two speakers. So Martin, please let's have a look at your presentation as well and tell us how it dovetails with what Julie has been presenting.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak on this very important topic. My name is Martin Stoev. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Adhash. My team and I have spent the better part of a decade re-engineering and simplifying the advertising supply chain. Our thesis is very simple. We want to sell products to people without turning people into products, because advertising is the lifeline of free content online. It's a simple and transparent business model that enables the free distribution of knowledge globally and gives us all an unprecedented access to information. It used to be simple and transparent. That was until the big tech monopolies turned the advertising economy into the surveillance economy. Being followed on every step we make online has its costs. not just from the obvious and disturbing user privacy perspective, but also from the economic perspective of powering the open internet. You see, having to load hundreds of ad trackers and scripts from thousands of other companies every time we open a new page has a very direct effect on the internet as we know it. Users spend up to 16 times as much data on downloading ad scripts as they do on content. On average, 70% of publishers' earnings are wasted on middlemen, who often bring zero or even negative value. And advertisers are going to lose close to 40 billion on ad fraud this year alone. The complexity of the ad supply chain created by the behavioral targeting employed by the advertising monopolies is suffocating the creation of quality content and free distribution of ideas. They've been trying to convince us that there is no better way, that user privacy is a commodity that has to be sold to the highest bidder, that SMEs will not be able to reach their clients without their complex mesh of middlemen and trackers. But nothing could be further from the truth. As Julie demonstrated before me, contextual advertising can be both privacy-preserving and more efficient. And it is not surprising. Contextual advertising requires a much simpler and more direct supply chain and operates on decision-making that is far more deterministic and transparent. Rest assured, I'll add more data points to the research, to the pile of evidence that already exists, that we don't need surveillance to enable the internet. But before I do that, I thought it would be interesting to talk about the reason why we are where we are today. Why do the tech giants keep pushing behavioral advertising forward? Why do they refuse to do contextual? Have you asked yourself that question? After all, Google search, which is by far the most profitable asset of Google and the jewel in its crown, operates almost entirely on contextual targeting. So what makes them so aggressive when pursuing behavioral to be the only way of monetizing the rest of the internet, the part that doesn't directly belong to them? And the answer to this very important question is a simple matter of supply and demand. You see, creating high quality content is difficult. It takes creativity, a lot of work, and a lot of resources. High quality content is of limited supply. And when selling ads next to it, Google can only raise the prices so far. However, the genius economic idea behind behavioral targeting is that it takes this paradigm of limited high quality content and it flips it into an unlimited supply of just any content. If you can convince the client that their ads don't have to be shown on legitimate websites, as long as they follow the users everywhere they go, you can sell an infinite amount of ads next to any clickbaity, plagiarized, or even fake content. And sure, Google might have to offer that inventory at a slightly lower price, but they would have an infinite amount of it, which would more than make up for the difference. And yes, that's a genius decision for their bottom line, but a terrible blow to the internet as we know it. Millions upon millions of web pages populated by bots and the occasional lost user suck the life out of real journalism and real content creators. They're like that Italian artist who sold an invisible sculpture for £13,000 and gave the buyer a certificate of authenticity to prove that it was real. Or to quote some industry research, a study by MIT shows that even targeting something as basic as gender is unsuccessful more than half the time. As much as 65% of location-targeted ad spend is wasted. A class action lawsuit that was brought against Facebook revealed that the accuracy of its targeting algorithms was between 9 and 41%. And NISO research shows that accuracy of most targeting criteria rarely exceeds 50% and often falls below 20%. Yet third-party data costs can easily amount to 50% of the total advertising spend. And those are the problems that ethical, non-behavioral advertising is trying to solve. It's not just the obvious privacy problems, it's also the economic model of the entire internet. By putting the emphasis on the content, we're not only protecting the user reading it, we're also rewarding the author who created it. And by not having to employ dozens of scripts on every page the user visits, we enable for a much simpler and more transparent ad supply chain. That results in far lower commissions and much higher data accuracy. Let me illustrate with some numbers. I decided to bring data from the opposite side of Europe to my colleague speaking here today. So I'm presenting our findings from a head-to-head comparison of Adhash's contextual targeting technology versus Google's top tool for behavioral targeting called DB360. When Domino's Pizza Bulgaria A/B tested the two tools, they measured that Adhash delivered clicks that were 43.8% cheaper. And that's unsurprising. After all, contextual targeting allows a much more direct supply chain, charging far lower commissions. But they didn't just find that they were spending less as an advertiser. Publishers were actually earning more. And that couldn't be explained by just the lowered commission. Publishers were earning more because the ads were more likely to be clicked. 92.3% more likely, to be precise. Almost double. But to me, the third major finding in that case study was the most significant one. 25 times more of Domino's ad spend went to premium publishers with Adhash versus Google. That meant they were tremendously more effective in supporting high-quality journalism and content creation. Adhash is used by several hundred clients, both publishers and advertisers. All of them report similar results. And they're just scratching the surface. We're only getting started, because contextual targeting is about much more than just analyzing text and images. Context is all around us. At Adhash, we take a huge swathe of real-world data points into account when targeting. Live and forecasted weather, for example, sports results, real-time scores, breaking news and political events, or movements on the financial markets. Anything that has influence on the purchasing decisions of consumers that happens in their surroundings and doesn't have to pry on their personal data. Anything that helps to sell product to people without turning people into products. By limiting the abuse of personal data through behavioral targeting, we will not only make the open web a safer and more pleasant environment, we will make it much richer. European companies have built top-notch solutions to power the future of the web. Not as a second-best solution to behavioral targeting that happens to be more privacy-focused, but as a better solution for all parties involved. Contextual is an order of magnitude cheaper for publishers. It provides far more accurate and measurable targeting for advertisers. And it frees users to browse and support the web without hiding behind multiple ad blockers or having to circumnavigate paywalls. And it's ready today. The change is inevitable, and there is a significant chance that this time European startups will be in the lead. The internet users have spoken and will get there one way or the other. But we ask you to help us get there faster. Thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Martin. And indeed, there's plenty of comments and questions I can see coming in. So I do urge our audience to keep them coming, because we will have plenty of time for discussion after we hear from our next speaker, Erik. Erik, I know you've been paying attention to our first two speakers and probably have a lot to add to it from your own perspective. So please tell us what your thoughts are around the topic.
Thank you very much. So the last 6 years, Kobler, we have been developing a contextual self-serve advertising platform that makes it possible to align an ad with the content on the page to maximize the attention of the user. And this brings me to what I call the fallacy of the last decade of online advertising, that context, meaning the user's actual interest, doesn't matter for advertising anymore. Only presumed user interest matters. But how are you as an advertiser going to catch the attention of this imagined user if you don't know where you're communicating to this user? You don't have the context in which you're communicating. So the Kobler platform therefore gives full real-time transparency on where your ads will be shown and where they are shown across all the 110 publisher sites that is currently in the platform in Scandinavia. Because only when you're sure that there will be a match between your ad and the content it will be shown on, can the platform optimize the delivery of the campaign on the maximum relevance for the advertiser. All the major holding media agency holding groups in Scandinavia has now chosen Kobler as their preferred contextual platform, and we're working with all types of advertisers, from the largest to the smallest. So far, there has been 650 SMEs that have run a contextual campaign through Kobler. That is very often much more than the media companies have them on by themselves. Self-serve is very important for the inclusion of SMEs, since they don't have the budgets and resources of the large businesses. Alpha Shoes is one of these SMEs. The 91-year-old company that manufactures ski and trekking boots for outdoor activities, but also footwear for professional users. As most SMEs, they have a limited budget, so broad campaigns are not an option. But they do know what their customers cares about, and that is reflected in the content on their page. This content represents some of the contextual opportunities that they can use for advertising effectively. Based on these content segments, contextual campaigns are intuitive to set up and run across all national publishers. One example you see to the left here is a promotion of their ski boots during the Olympics on the largest national newspaper in Norway, and hiking boots on the article on the campaign on the regional newspaper as well. Keep in mind that Alpha does not have a large enough marketing budget to be able to enter a direct agreement with even one of these news sites. But by optimizing their budget on the most relevant articles to the campaign period, they were exposed on 2,000 of the 150,000 published articles during 1 month. So it's easy to see that this is a good way to communicate. It's a good thing for the advertiser, and it's also a good reading experience for the user. But not only for the marketing people in Alpha, but also for them to communicate this internally to other departments. Having control on the exposure through full transparency is key to achieving this. So let's imagine an alternative scenario where Alpha would target their advertising based on user interest. When buying an audience, for instance, on the right there, on the hiking boots, are the user very interested in hiking or hardly at all? That is something that behavioral targeting doesn't reveal at all. But with contextual, that doesn't really matter because the user has chosen to read the article. So this is her actual interest in the moment. Our data shows that a high degree of relevance between the article and the ad shown increases not only the click-through rates as we see here, meaning the share of users that click on the ad, but also has a higher impact on users that don't click. And that is really important because most of the users don't click on the ad, but they are exposed to this message and it needs to get attention. And that is what we've shown over a 3-year period that contextual does. And also something that Julie talked about with their study. And we also see that when advertisers have full transparency into what they're buying, as opposed to behavioral targeting, they are also willing to pay a lot more. So this goes to also the question that I can see in the comments here. Publishers get a higher yield for the ad inventory sold contextually through Kobler than any other platform. Actually 2 to 3 times higher than competing platforms. Contextual is now important for all the publishers that are part of the Kobler platform, as opposed to 3 years ago when we launched the platform. So as my previous speakers have said, and I think we've shown that contextual advertising is clearly suitable for SMEs and also viable for publishers. And it therefore puzzles me that Google's lobbying machine continue to sell the narrative that SMEs depend on their massive tracking. Actually, Google's main business is search advertising, which is contextual. In addition to contextual, I understand advertisers' need for location targeting. That means that SMEs can limit their targeting to an area around their business if they're local. But this location targeting doesn't need to be intrusive as today. It's sufficient if it's approximately. And this challenge is easy to solve if the industry wanted to do that. I think today's location targeting clearly shows that the ad tech industry is not looking for privacy-friendly solutions for advertisers. The problem of solving the user location could be easily solved by getting together and agreeing on a way that the user could set an approximate location for advertising that is gathered by the user agent, meaning the browser on the device or the device, and sending this to sites and apps that are dependent on advertising. Instead, they have created yet another massive intrusive surveillance industry that, based on the documents revealed in the state's lawsuit against Google, not even privacy engineers at Google knows how to turn it off. But this comes as no surprise if you understand how the online advertising industry is rigged in a way that hurts businesses, publishers, and innovative companies like Qwarry, Adhash, and Kobler. The day after the European Parliament voted for the Digital Markets Act, 2 European marketing professors got a very interesting article published in the Harvard Business Review. The article strips the claims that the big tech companies make when it comes to delivering effective advertising to SMEs. I'll just read the excerpt from the article. The fact is, when Facebook, Google, Twitter, and other big tech companies educate small businesses about their services, they often are actually encouraging incorrect conclusions about the casual effects of advertising. People who regularly buy cosmetics don't buy them because they see promoted tweets. They see promoted tweets for cosmetics because they regularly buy cosmetics. Customers who see promoted tweets from a brand, in other words, are very different people from those who don't. Targeting likely buyers with ads is a pure prediction problem. It does not require casual inference. It is easy to do with today's data and algorithms. Persuading people to buy is much harder. In short, this means that big tech doesn't really create new customers, but they shuffle existing customers between competitors and claim to deliver unique value. As long as they get access to enough data on their customers' behavior, their systems will be able to target these likely customers and claim to have converted them. And where does Google and Facebook get all this data from? Well, from advertisers and publishers. Google is present with tracking technology on 75% of all websites. In addition, they have the most used browser and mobile phone operating system. If we continue to let this massive collection of data happen, it will be very hard for genuine innovation to happen in this industry. So I urge European politicians and the Council to start limiting the collection of this data by first banning targeting based on sensitive data in addition towards minors. Since the ad tech industry refuses to innovate on privacy by itself, make browser signals like do not track mandatory for all. And when I say all, it must be also applicable to all intermediary services, not just very large online platforms. If not, the ad tech industry will continue to manipulate publishers and advertisers into upholding the current surveillance system that hurts everyone else. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Erik. I quite like that you've almost taken us back to the real basics there about what is advertising, what is it seeking to do, what is the nature of an advert, is ultimately to encourage people to part with their hard-earned cash. And then that's something that I think we need to recognize. Because I think, as you say, shuffling existing customers around is not the same as actually converting or creating new customers. Let me bring back in Julie and Martin and start the conversation by putting on my devil's advocate hat and say that, well, hey, there's loads of tools we already have. The GDPR has given us lots of rights and tools, and we can say we want to opt out of things. Why do we need change to happen at a, if you like, a legal level when we have given users tools already to use to opt out of being tracked? Martin, let me put that to you first.
Sure, of course. Well, you have an industry where you have nowadays close to 8,000 players, a lot of whom are involved in tracking regular users, asking the users to constantly trying to manage that and be savvy enough and informed enough to actually implement all those decision making on every publisher they visit, is frankly asking too much of the user. That's a bargain we never seem to have agreed to make as internet users, that, you know, our privacy is now a commodity that's being traded to the highest bidder. And I think the more important point here is that there is a model where we do get access to free information online without all those companies focusing necessarily on us. The technology exists, and machine learning is nowadays sophisticated enough to actually be able to extract super valuable information from the context that essentially moves the spotlight away from us as people and onto the content. And I think that's at the very least a topic worth researching, a topic worth pursuing and experimenting with. As all the companies here today have mentioned, we've already been doing it for a couple of years, and the sole reason we exist is because it performs better than behavioral. I don't think that any of our companies would have clients if our customers A/B tested against behavioral and found out that it wasn't as good. So I think it's showing a lot of promise, and we're only at the beginning stages now.
Well, Julie, let me bring you in and ask you about, to borrow some of the terminology that we see in the AI Act that is also forthcoming. We look at sort of risk-based. What is the harm? I mean, can you clarify more for us? What's the harm if we see too many adverts that we don't want to see? What's the harm in sharing this cookie data? Because so many publishers and so many of the real-time bidding hierarchy say, well, it's anonymized. It's not, it's not really going to be used to track you.
The thing is, it's all about perception, For when I'm speaking about the consumer, the user, whenever you go to on a website, let's say you want to buy a new bike for your kid, and after you've done a few researches and you've been on a couple of websites, then you will continuously see the bike all over again until you actually purchase it. So it's more about the feeling of people get chased on their everyday life, and that's why we've seen such a high rate of ad blocker use, especially in Europe. I think the latest study said that about 30 or 35% of the users were actually added an ad blocker on their desktop to avoid that. So it is a concern. And when it comes to GDPR, yes, it helped, but like Martin said, it's super difficult for the consumer, for the user. If they really want to delete all their information, they really need to get into the consent management platform and pull out all the things they don't want to share. It's very complicated, So I think it's more of a workaround, if I may say. And no one wants to share their data. I mean, but what also users need to understand, and I'm speaking on the publisher side, is that publishers they're making money out of advertising, So it's a double standard. But the thing is, we cannot just let people's privacy going all over places and just do nothing about it. And contextual with other solutions can actually be an alternative to that.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in a comment that's been made by one of our audience members, Tone Coppens, is saying that publishers earn 8 times less on contextual advertising rather than audience targeting. And I don't know where those figures are from, so I'm just going to present them as they were presented in the conversation. If there's any more information, feel free to share that in the comments. So he's suggesting that broadcasting cookie data is the issue, not audience targeting. How do you react to that, Erik? And also maybe reflect on some of the points of that is effectively the real-time bidding model.
Well, first of all, I think the claim there that contextual is 8 times less valuable than audience targeting for publishers clearly falls flat based on what I presented. It's the other way around. It's actually 2 to 3 times more valuable than audience targeting, at least how the advertising market works today. But you do have a point, too, that broadcasting of the data to third parties is a big problem. And of course, keeping this within the first party relationship, meaning if I go to a site, I expect them not to share this data with others, then of course, me personally, I would be fine with that. But the problem is that that's not really happening today. And also what we see is that publishers are manipulated into using new technologies after the third-party cookie goes away by backend server connections and other solutions and identifiers. So the industry will continue to keep on doing what they have for the last 1.5 decades, I would say. So I think also as a comment to why we need this change, I think unfortunately GDPR has not really done a lot for companies like Qwarry, Adhash and Kobler. But what we see is the enforcement by Apple, that they're actually having anti-tracking technology has helped us more than the lack of enforcement of GDPR. And of course, that's a problem because when we have companies that are innovating with new solutions based on existing regulation, we spend a lot of money doing innovation here. But if the rest of the industry doesn't respect that regulation and they continue as they've done before, and regulators don't enforce the law, then of course it's like you say that you're not allowed to pollute nature anymore. And some manufacturers stop doing that, but their neighbor will continue, their competitor will continue. And of course, that is a situation that is not something that can continue, because then you will not have innovation in any industry if you set out rules and they are not followed or enforced. So until now, I must say that the anti-tracking has been more significant for the rise of contextual than enforcement, unfortunately. And also back to the point of what's the harm here by this tracking. I would say that most people don't normally defend the freedom of speech every day. Most people never do. But once they actually need that right, they will be very happy that someone else actually defended their right for freedom of speech. And this is what we're talking about here. It's the freedom of having a personal online life, not being tracked all the time. And that is something that Europe set out when it actually voted for GDPR, and also that we should make sure that the DSA strengthened.
Thank you. Well, I think, and I'm sure Alexandra is very well aware of this, I think you made the point that for ethical actors probably don't need the laws. It's the bad actors and the enforcement, therefore, that we need the laws for. And I see Toon has commented that he's actually making a distinction between open market programmatic and real-time bidding on one side, which is pretty toxic, and first-party data based on audience targeting and without the data sharing element on the other side. I think there was a lot of nuance in some of these comments as well, which is wonderful. But I would like to then ask Martin, it seems to me that some of the issues we have in talking about this are in how can you present the effectiveness of contextual advertising versus, if you like, targeted or real-time bidding or programmatic advertising on the other side, because measuring that success is obviously very key if you're to make a persuasive argument. So how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it becomes even more complex because it's actually a marketplace. It's not. It wouldn't be fair to just measure the effectiveness of contextual versus behavioral from the point of view of an advertiser. You also have to take into account the publisher, because if it worked, let's say 3 times as well for an advertiser, but then was abysmal to the performance of publisher monetization, that really wouldn't be a sustainable model, right? You still need to keep the balance, and you still need to keep everyone happy. And I think there are several ways in which it's fairly obvious where the benefits can come from. It's always good to, especially when you're dealing with such a complex industry as ours, it's good to step back and just think about it from first principles, sometimes even do a bit of a back of the napkin calculations, right? If behavioral advertising today, especially when we're talking about real-time bidding in the open market, costs upwards of 70% in commission, that means that you have 2/3 of the budget to actually play with, because I think all participants today will agree that contextual is vastly cheaper to run and more efficient and can easily fit into single-digit percentage points. So if you have 2.5 to 3 times as much of the advertiser's budget reaching the publisher as you would otherwise have, you have a lot more leeway and flexibility and a lot more opportunities to buy high-quality inventory. And in addition to that, you have all those hundreds of diminishing accuracy of behavioral targeting, and the surveillance model of targeting, where you typically spend 50, 60, 70% of your money on targeting that is actually inaccurate. And for the very little that reaches the target audience, you have to spend 2/3 on commissions. You actually find out that you have a huge potential increase in performance that you can gain. And doing contextual means that you're only dealing with 100% verifiable data. You don't need to worry whether the data broker who sold you that particular data set was actually truly targeting, men or skiers or whatever university degree professionals, right? Anything that you have targeted, any inventory that you've bought, you can validate, because you can see where it was shown and you can immediately decide whether it was the right impression, or you remove the element of speculation. So that's where the potential benefits in contextual come from. That's why there is room for improvement versus behavioral. And publishers and advertisers should each measure it independently and should be compared on both sides. The way we typically do A/B tests would be to get the same advertiser and the same publisher run a campaign. The publisher needs to figure out how much of the money reached them at the end of the day, and the advertiser would then, based on their KPIs, measure how satisfied they were with the performance. There are always some, easy to distinguish metrics that the industry agrees on, but you can also look at heat maps of how people interact with the ads, how quickly they click on them, how quickly they abandon pages, etc. And that entire data set becomes a case study of comparison between behavioral and contextual. So I hope that answers the question, but maybe some of the others can fill in more details.
Absolutely, indeed. Julie, I do want you to reflect on this question as well. In fact, Angela Mills-Wade has asked there, how do we persuade advertisers to move away from the sheer scale, ease, and performance that they feel they get from the likes of Google and Facebook, which I guess is a similar question as to how do you measure the effectiveness of other methods?
Oh, well, the thing is by talking to them, obviously. So like everyone knows, almost 80 it's between, I think, 80-85% of all advertisers' budgets go directly through the duopoly. It's either Google or it's Meta now. It's not Facebook anymore. So the first thing is not to lose the connection with advertiser. I think that at Kobler and Adhash, they are doing it as well. It's not only about small businesses. Of course, there's a lot of advertising budget here, but you also need to talk to the big companies that are spending millions and millions in those platforms. So the first thing is to reach out to them, telling them there are alternatives, getting test budget, showing them that it actually works for them, how it works better in terms of branding KPIs, but also other metrics. We also run several A/B testing, A/B tests using behavior versus contextual, and I have to agree with Martin and Erik that the results are usually better with contextual. So there's been a common thought that behavior was everything, and that we need to focus just on the user, and that contextual didn't matter, didn't perform, and that it had to be removed of all the media strategy. But something that I try to enlighten is that the way we are doing contextual today has nothing to do with the way it was done 10 or 15 years ago, where it was just basically focusing on domains. Now we can go by the URL, we can predict exactly what the context is talking about. I'm pretty sure in a few months, few years, we will be able to predict the age or the gender of the user just by analyzing the context. So we can replicate what has been successful for advertiser in terms of behavior targeting, and we can put it in contextual. So that's what we've been doing at Qwarry for the past 3 years, and we had a lot of success. So the thing is, like I said, continue to speak with advertiser, trying to run tests, show that it works, and replicate.
Thank you. Erik, I have a specific question for you coming in from Nuria Kochling, asking, does Alpha or other firms show different photos to different users on their website using their contextual browsing? I guess the focus there is on what sort of differentials are available for photos as well as other types of advertising or content that might be presented.
Well, I understand the question, and since it's not based on users, then the ad creative will not change based on the user, but it will change based on the content. And of course, if you see that as a whole, as a reader of consumer of content, the match there between content and ad creative is far more effective very often than just changing or adapting based on the user. So the answer to your question is no, they don't.
Okay, well, thank you. I also want to come back to a question that was asked quite early on in our discussion by Digital Values, asking, aren't the big platforms also very strong in contextual targeting and have advantages over publishers? I think there that the crux of that question is looking at, if you like, dominance and the issues that having so few big behemoths really in the space of advertising has skewed what even companies know about their own customers, which is actually problematic in other areas as well. Martin, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that.
You're muted, Martin.
Thank you. Apologies. I guess when we're talking about the big platforms and contextual, the most obvious one to look at would be Google, since they're the ones who are scraping the whole internet and are indexing the world's knowledge. And they also do, as Erik mentioned, a lot of contextual targeting in their search engine, which is their core advertising product right now. But they don't seem to be doing much of that in terms of the open internet and monetizing the rest of the internet. And the main reason for that is, as I tried to point out in my presentation, is that doing contextual advertising on the open internet would limit them to the high quality content producers, to the high quality journalism and high value content creators. Whereas doing behavioral really expands that inventory infinitely, because now they can say, well, we are tracking the same user even though if they're visiting a misinformation website or a low quality website or plagiarized website, etc. So it's not really in their interests, financially speaking, to do contextual advertising. Behavioral advertising also allows for far more variables coming from unknown third-party sources to be mixed into the data streams, which also allows a larger margin for profits. And that also is a crucial aspect of why we think that the big players are not really that deep into contextual. I mean, sure, there are some big companies who are doing contextual advertising, but compared to the big advertising monopolies, they're still quite small in size. And I think that also addresses maybe Toon's first question about how contextual would work in COVID and articles about the Ukrainian war, etc. I think it's a very good point. I think as publishers are hurting from this because the news that they actually have to talk about not always are the news that advertisers are willing to pay to have their placements placed next to. But that is already happening, and they're already being demonetized. It's called brand safety, and it's happening in behavioral advertising as well. They'll just be blindly blocked from all ad spend by any of the major advertisers and major ad agencies. At least with contextual, now you have deeper understanding of that content. So if there is an advertiser who is willing to purchase that content, they will. Because with behavioral, with just blind brand safety, you will not serve a single ad. So even in that scenario, contextual is already better than behavioral would be. So contextual, and I cannot emphasize this strongly enough, is a publisher's best friend. It values high quality content and it places ads based on the content that it was produced, which is something that the publisher has control over. So, yeah.
I'm going to move on to this question about news content and publishing towards the end. But I first want to bring back in Alexandra around these questions of the sheer scale and size of some of the actors and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that is an extremely important question, and we don't have the ultimate solution yet. And I think we need publishers' help there to solve that. Just two remarks. I think one big issue that big advertisers, not so much SMEs, but especially big advertisers have been making to me, for example, talking to a major German car maker, I said, well, brand safety is such a huge issue for us that we are seriously considering going back to in-housing our advertising and not giving it to big agencies, because it's so detrimental for us if our ads are seen next to far-right content, for example, COVID denial content, and that kind of content. So this is, I think, is really a huge issue for major advertisers who really want to advertise their brand rather than a single product. A second issue there is ad fraud, which we are not discussing today, and we made a choice not to mix up too many topics, but I think ad fraud, especially big advertisers, are very, very aware of how big the ad fraud issue is and how clients are taking away and how they're just paying too much. And this is something that people don't talk about much, but big advertising agencies may profit from ad fraud because it actually drives up the numbers, it drives up the volumes that advertisers have to pay for. So there the question is, contextual advertising does significantly, I think, reduce ad fraud. From what I have learned, it might not solve the problem completely, but it definitely does help. And that might be two levers in order to induce advertisers to move. If you give them the possibility to significantly address brand safety issues and ad fraud issues. That's the more the industry, the answer that might come from the industry. I think there's a second answer that needs to come, and that needs to come from policymakers, and that is antitrust at addressing monopolies. I think that the Digital Markets Act is a first important step, but it might not be enough. And I think there's an increasing awareness that having the free press being financed which is financed by advertising in our societies, and having the advertising market controlled by 80-90% by a duopoly, we have a threat to our free press, and our free press is really the basis for our free democracy. And I think there is a rising awareness that this doesn't work, and that we need to diversify the funding sources and the companies funding the free press. And I think that's a task for the policymakers. Digital Markets Act is an important first step. And I think we need to make more steps. If the ban that we will get with the DSA on sensitive data, that's a first step as well. But all this might be enough to really induce a paradigm shift in the industry and to get away from the duopoly. If it isn't, I think we need to do more there. But what we do need is the help of publishers. Publishers need to tell us what kind of infrastructure might help in order to recreate the sheer scale, ease, and performance, as you say, Angela, in contextual advertising, but with a multiple actors and not with a duopoly. This is something we need to work on together. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra, and indeed for our questioners as well. I see a couple more coming in from Robert Blank, asking, how do you set up your brand safety filters? Are you discussing that with publishers or only serving advertisers for that purpose? Also asking whether you pay publishers a fee for scraping the website content for the contextual engines. Martin, do you want to tackle that first, and then I will let Erik and Julie have a say if they wish.
Sure. I'll speak from our perspective as a company, because others might be approaching this differently. The way we set up brand safety filters is we discuss, it's also based on different regions and languages, so we have different rules. There are options to make them more strict or less strict. We consult that with publishers, but brand safety is something that serves predominantly advertisers. It's the advertisers' way of ensuring that they're showing the ads next to content that they approve of. I think the best thing we can do for publishers is to actually show them exactly how much of their content was blocked through brand safety by the different advertisers. Not just percentage points, but also which articles. It's a tremendous amount of information is adds extra complexity, but we want to be very transparent. We do it for brand safety. We do it also for the different ad fraud attack vectors that we block. We do it for non-viewable ads, etc. So the instances where advertisers decide not to pay for something is, of course, their decision, because they're the ones purchasing the inventory. But you want to transmit to the publisher as much data as you want to, so that you help them navigate it and plan their future earnings. And I think publishers have been very grateful for having that level of access. As far as paying a fee for scraping the data, web scraping is free and accessible to all. We don't pay a direct fee to publishers. The way publishers earn from it is by having those advertisers bid higher through contextual than they would otherwise bid. So it still ends up in the publisher's pockets at the end of the day.
Thank you. Julie, would you like to add to that, please?
Yeah, I'm going to say exactly the same thing as Martin. When it comes to brand safety, at Qwarry, we talk more about brand suitability, because brand safety is really focused on specific IAB categories, such as adult, arms, crimes, so things like that. And so we try to take it a little bit further down. And for us, brand suitability matters more than brand safety. That it can talk, let's say there's an article that talks about cyclism, but in one case it's an accident, and in the other case it's just a race. It's both going to talk, those articles are both going to look like they talk about cyclism, but in the end it's not the same. So we try to move away from brand safety, which can be very reductive, especially if it's only using keywords. So let's say, I would take just an example. You will have an article that will say, I don't know, Real Madrid attacked the Munich soccer team last night. Because that's the word attack in the title of the article, most of those tools, so brand safety tool, will consider it as not safe for the brand. Whereas by using brand suitability, we go deeper down the analysis of the text and we can say, oh, it's not talking about any attacks. It's actually talking about soccer. So there are different layers when it comes to brand safety, brand suitability. And like Martin said, it really has a bad effect on publishers, where they are losing maybe 20-25% of their overall revenue, especially news websites, because sometimes there are false positive or true negative. So we are really trying to help on that. So at Qwarry, we have 3 different shields of brand suitability. One that is very restrictive, especially for brands that it really matters for them exactly where they're going to be. We have a strong one, a medium one, and a lower one. So it's kind of up to the advertiser, but we are in many discussions with publisher to help them better monetize those inventories that some technology could consider not safe and that are actually perfectly safe. And when it comes to the scrapping of their website, it's the same position as Martin. If we don't analyze the content, we are not able to purchase inventories for advertisers. So they get a direct fee, a direct commission, because we manage to buy that inventory based on contextual. So this is how the publisher gets the gain, the added value of contextual, by having a direct revenue per impression.
Well, thank you. You mentioned IAB, and I did want to touch on the recent case that we've seen the Belgian Data Protection Authority bringing against IAB. I'm wondering from all of you, how relevant or important are these sorts of enforcements of existing GDPR rules when you see for your customers, in reflecting back to you what they want or what their concerns are? Erik, perhaps you could give me your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think when it comes to the enforcement of the IAB's transparency and content framework, most publishers and advertisers is basically waiting for something to happen before they do anything. So I think IAB has now, through their local organizations, have told the different stakeholders that they should just sit tight and they won't risk anything by continuing to use this framework. So I think strong enforcement now will be important, because in my view it's clearly violating several aspects of GDPR, and I can't see that this can actually continue going forward.
Thank you. Martin, your thoughts or your reaction to that, whether weak enforcement or perhaps sketchy or perhaps not aligned enforcement around the EU, does that create difficulties for you, for your customers?
Yeah, I think so, but I mostly agree with Erik's position on this one.
Okay, well, thank you. I think probably there's quite a lot of agreement there in between all 3 of you as well. And Alexandra has obviously got the unenviable task of trying to work out how that can be translated into law that covers all the bases without having these so-called unintended consequences. And also, again, as I've mentioned earlier, the need to really consider that good actors are already trying to operate ethically, and it is the bad actors that we want to target with our laws in Europe. I would say that we've got just about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to go back to each of you to hear your sort of closing thoughts, what you want to see coming from the DSA, what you think might still be a little bit concerning, and your thoughts about how that might impact on the industry in its development over the coming years. Julie, I started with you at the beginning, so let me start with you for the wrap up.
I'm really curious to see what is going to happen. So what I really want is, like I said in the introduction, I think everyone here wants to reinvent advertising in a way, at least around this table. And we truly, every one of us believe that it comes with data privacy as top of mind. So I'm really looking forward to see how it's gonna end up. Obviously, I think we need a new framework. The one that we have, it doesn't work anymore. People need their privacy back. Publisher needs to have new ways to monetize their inventory space. I think advertiser and some of the agency they also want new option, new targeting option, new ways to be able to create, to get attention from consumers. So I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen.
Thank you. Erik, I will ask you for your closing remarks or your final thoughts that perhaps Alexandra can take with her at the end of our conversation.
Yes. First of all, just let me comment on the brand safety and publisher cooperation. Kobler, we're coming from a different direction because we previously delivered a contextual product as a supplier to the publishers. So, but then both we and the publishers saw that we needed to move this to the buy side in order for it to scale. So that means we are working in close cooperation with all publishers here, meaning we get access to also content behind paywall because they set their own prices. So they set the floor price. So we buy based on that. And that means if we were to buy on OpenRTB, we could skim all the profit here, but now we're sharing that with publishers, and I think that is really important. So that also goes to Angela Mills-Wade and the work in EPC, I guess. And of course, publishers could solve this by removing the full URL from the RTB feed. Some have. But the problem now is all these brand safety solutions and ad verification that require this full URL, meaning that they deliver a subpar service that actually hurts publishers more than it actually should, because we see, due to the transparency we have in the platform, we actually have advertisers who want to target sensitive topics. And within a week, we had advertisers like NGOs that were targeting articles on the war in Ukraine, actually. So you can also see this in another way. That is something when advertisers have control, they actually could utilize more of the inventory for publishers instead of just looking at the internet as a whole and see this as ad inventory that's available everywhere. So I think I said at least some of my hopes for the DSA. I think introducing browser signals like do not track, that is mandatory to follow for every internet service is very important. Even though I don't like this individual responsibility for our collective fundamental human rights, I think that's a bad approach. But if we are not allowed to at least state through device settings that we don't want to be tracked, then I think we're headed, or then I think solving this will be very difficult, and encouraging innovation will be also very hard. Yes.
Thank you. Martin, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I guess I'll answer not just from the more focused and narrow perspective of a co-founder building something in this field, but as a general user, because this concerns us all. I think we as users have spoken. There's been so much discussion on the topic. You have close to 1 billion ad blockers installed worldwide. You have regulators and even browsers, implementing the user choices for us. And the industry is still stagnant and refusing to innovate and refusing to take into account what users actually want. And when that happens, those companies typically get disrupted. You have to be able to innovate, you have to be able to address the market demands, and you have to be able to address the shifting tides. If they're not, then I think over the next few years, we will be sitting in a very interesting seat watching how all of this unfolds and how all of this affects our online lives. And I think for the first time, specifically in this industry, Europe will be in the driving seat, and we'll be seeing most of the innovation happen here and then propagate across the rest of the world. So I think it's quite exciting, and every one of those steps forward is super interesting to watch.
Thank you very much indeed. So, Alexandra, we've scheduled 5 minutes for you to wrap up of everything that's been said, or to encourage further conversation. I know that is an extremely tall order because we've had such articulate speakers, and they've been very wide-ranging in responding to some challenging questions. I think that we could say we've got more comments. It's good that people are asking the difficult questions and pushing us to really try and come up with some interesting answers. But I'm going to hand the floor over to you to wrap it up. I know there's various websites you can direct people to keep the conversation going beyond 1:30 today. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I won't use the 5 minutes, I think, because I realize I'm standing between everybody's lunch. So I think everybody is hungry. I think what this discussion really shows is, as you said, the challenges are tough, but it's worth it. And with the DSA, DMA, Europe is already tackling major issues as the first democratic continent globally. And I can assure you that also from the US, there is so much interest. Everybody is looking at us. And we are really doing some groundbreaking work. And groundbreaking work means that you don't have all the solutions. I'm not telling you we are having all the solutions. We are just trying to put them on the table and then see what do we need to do on the legislative side on the one hand, and this is what we are doing, and I hope we will finish next Friday with the Digital Services Act and really take a big step. The Digital Markets Act, there already is an agreement, and I think it's good. It might not be ambitious enough for what I would have liked to see, but it's still a big step forward. So what I would like to assure everybody is what we are trying to do is in the publisher's best interest. Because what we're seeing right now is a duopoly globally and also in Europe. And if you compare you look at the curves of the decrease in publishers' revenue and the increase in Google and Facebook's revenue, and you look at, when are these lines going to cross? That's more or less the point where you have to ask yourself, are we going to have a free press? And I've been talking, and Angela, you know that, I've been talking really, really a lot to European press and especially to the press and publishers in my country, Germany. And I don't really hear an answer that is extremely convincing. So I think we really have a common interest here in, on the one hand, breaking that monopoly and making sure that free press, that free media have a really, really broad revenue base. And on the other hand, the political interest as Democrats, which we all are, in making sure that that revenue base can happen without surveillance. And this is a huge paradigm shift. If you have a system that is dominated 80, 90% by two companies, then going forward to a future where this is guaranteed by hundreds, thousands, millions of companies, that is not going to be easy. And there are open questions. What I would like you all to do, even if you're critical of the ideas we are having, help us to develop the best ideas. How can we make sure press has enough revenue without surveying the citizens of this planet and of our continents? I'm always here. We are here as the Green Zephyr Group. I'm here as someone who has really tried to delve very deeply in this difficult topic. Talk to us, help us. Let's have a conversation. DSA, DMA will be start, but I think we will need more on the industry side and on the legislative side. So let us know what you think and how we can develop common solutions. With this, I encourage you to have a look at the website dedicated to this campaign, which is a future without manipulation. I think it will be put up in the comments section if I can ask our technical staff to do that. You are very welcome to register for our newsletter, for my personal newsletter as well. And with this, I would very much like to thank Jennifer Baker for the great moderation. I would like to thank Julie Walther, Erik Bugge, Martin Stoev for their really precious and interesting contribution to our today's event. And with this, I would like to thank also all the participants with their important, even critical contributions. This is extremely important to advance our thinking. These are open questions we're trying to tackle together. So thank you for doing that. And I wish you all a wonderful week, and watch out for the results of the DSA trialogue hopefully on Friday. Have a great week. Thank you so much.
Bye.